Good morning, and welcome back to 5 a.m. Story Talk, a place to talk about stories in all their forms, the craft that goes into them, and the role that art plays in our lives. I'm still Cole Haddon, and today we're going to be talking about how I broke into the Hollywood film TV industry and how I learned to trust myself in a business where nobody knows anything, but everybody insists they know everything. Put another way, I'm going to tell you about my first script sale, how it almost didn't happen because of some questionable advice I received from my reps, and what the experience taught me about how to pursue my dreams of becoming a produced screenwriter, which I eventually achieved a few years later when a TV series I created, Dracula, premiered on NBC and Sky. That turned into a bit of a shit show, but that's a story for another day. First, I want to say yes, this is an interview podcast, but I'm a one person show here, my friends. I'm also a full time screenwriter and novelist with multiple projects on my plate at the moment. There's just no way I can sit down for 90-minute interviews with 4 to 5 guests every month, edit these chats, and share them with you while also taking care of my other obligations and, of course, spending time with my beautiful family. Every 3 to 4 episodes, I'm going to instead share with you my thoughts on arts and culture, most typically my thoughts on screenwriting, writing fiction, and storytelling in general. These will often come to you in the form of war stories because I have a lot of them after nearly 20 years as a professional artist. My hope is that these one on one conversations with you will provide you with some intimate, no bullshit access into what a life in the arts is like. If you're an aspiring screenwriter or novelist, I expect there will be a lot for you to learn from this, but especially if you're a screenwriter or hoping to become one sometime in the future. I know I wish someone had told me some of what I'm going to be telling you about here back when I was starting out. Before I dive in, I want to also remind you to check out this episode's show notes where you'll be able to subscribe to the 5 a.m. Story Talk Arts newsletter for free, as well as find links to things discussed here today. Every week, I post new articles and essays there about the arts. You'll also get access to most podcast episodes days and weeks before they're released on other podcast apps. Remember, new podcasts like 5 a.m. Story Talk thrive on word of mouth, and the 10 to 30 seconds you might spend subscribing, giving it 5 stars, or leaving a comment about what you enjoy about what I'm doing here can make a huge difference to its future. You should also feel free, in fact, I encourage you, to jump into the comments to ask any questions you might have about what I discuss here. Now, let's dive in. The time period was 2009. It was my fourth year in California. I grew up in Michigan, and I lived in an apartment with my then girlfriend, Lizzie Devlin, who eventually went on to marry me and become a produced screenwriter too. I've tried to do the math here, looking back at what records I have, but collectively we were in about $150,000 of debt from university loans and credit card balances we'd racked up trying to survive this silly artist quest we'd committed ourselves to. Everything was kind of terrible at this point in our lives, but also kind of wonderful when I think back on it today. Hollywood was still a land of possibilities before the streamers, before the tech bros, before the dark times. These possibilities, the chance of something amazing and transformative happening on any given day, is probably what got us by. I know it's what got me by. I wanted nothing more than to write films and novels, which is pretty much all I did all day, every day, in between making 10 to 25 cents a word as a freelance arts journalist for the many alt weeklies that made up Village Voice Media and Time Shamrock Syndicate. I was 33 at this point, and I think I'd written somewhere in the vicinity of 200 screenplays and short stories and 2 novels trying to find my voice as an artist. That wasn't going so well. While who I really wanted to be was Todd Haynes or Steven Soderbergh, finding agents or managers who would rep these kinds of scripts from me had proven futile. Either I wasn't there yet as a writer, or more likely when I look back, I was attempting to pursue the kinds of stories I should have been trying to get made in a more independent space. You don't go to Hollywood to become an indie filmmaker, I mean. But my passion for cinema was much broader than smaller, intimate stories anyway. Like all of us, I'd grown up on the films of Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and James Cameron. I'd also grown up a voracious reader who especially loved 19th century literature. Dracula is but one example, which I'd later turn into that shit show of a TV series I mentioned earlier. Another is King Solomon's Mines, the H. Rider Haggard action-adventure novel published in 1885. I decided to write a Lawrence Kasdan-esque take on the novel, drawing a bit of inspiration from the 1950 film adaptation Spielberg was also a big fan of, I knew. Listen, it's a problematic novel in the context of history. It's a piece of romantic colonial fiction that centers a white colonist in an African story. But what I tried to do was approach it from a place of antagonism to that cultural mythology, with Alan Quatermain, the protagonist, as disgusted with the British Empire as I am, and constantly trying to defer his role to other smarter allies, such as the African warrior, secretly a prince, he's on this adventure with. The script, which was called Quatermain, didn't please the agent who had agreed to hip pocket me, which is a term for repping someone without actually fully committing to repping them, just hoping to cash in, really. The next reps I found loved the script, though, and so I quickly signed with them. They sent the project out a few weeks later, with half a dozen different producers attached to produce it, but we never managed to sell it. The goal in my mind hadn't been to sell it anyway, though that would have been amazing. No, the real goal was to introduce myself to the town. I tell new screenwriters this all the time. You're not writing that first script to make six figures against seven in a huge bidding war. That rarely happens anyway. No, it's to wow a rep and then wow the town. Hollywood, I mean. You need fans, people to advocate for you, to take all those other ideas you have and turn them into work. Because you can't become a professional screenwriter without help. A lot more help than just reps, I mean. Trust me. The good news is, that's exactly what Quatermain had done. It had made me boatloads of fans. Because of what I'd done with King Solomon's Mines, reimagining it as I had, creative executives around Hollywood kept asking me to similarly reimagine other classic books for them. After Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes became a huge hit, and the Pirates of the Caribbean films crossed $1 billion at the box office, everyone wanted their own period action venture franchise, and I was going to give it to them, or so I hoped. I'm a fiend for these characters and stories anyway, so it came naturally, I should add. There was nothing disingenuous about it. I was approaching them from a place of sincerity. One idea in particular really excited me. It was inspired by my love of the 1924 and 1940 The Thief of Baghdad films, which are based on some virtually untapped source material that hadn't produced significant films in more than half a century. That source material was The 1001 Nights, or, as it was rendered in its first English translation, Arabian Nights mythology. Yes, I know Aladdin had been made by then, but at the time it was only an animated film and only one corner of a vast universe of stories. There were 1001 nights, remember. One of my new fans, a young exec who has gone on to rise through the ranks of Hollywood, I've never stopped being proud of them, asked me what I was most excited to write about. I gave them a 10-second pitch that is, until this day, the most succinct, most effective pitch I've ever come up with. Here goes. It's called Thieves of Baghdad, and it's about the greatest thieves and scoundrels of Arabian Nights assembling in Ocean's 11 fashion to pull off the biggest heist of their career. The exec's face changed. It did this sort of lighting up thing one usually only sees in cartoons. They then immediately dragged me into their boss's office to pitch the boss too. They both loved it. Encouraged by this reaction, I took this idea to my reps to ask their advice on next steps. I mean, should we share it with other producers, try to get some competing interests maybe? Should I just go with these producers and pitch it wide with them? Should I spec it in a month and take it out to the town to hopefully create a competitive situation? This is when my anxiety began to skyrocket. My pitch elicited divided opinions from my reps, which at this point included both agents and managers. One half of my team said, "That's a great fucking idea," encouraged me to pitch it right away. The others repeatedly argued it was a waste of my time. The concern, they said, was that The Prince of Persia would soon be released. Nobody wanted another desert movie, or so I was told. Ignoring how offensive I found such a description, I pointed out this wasn't a desert movie, that Arabian Nights also takes place in lush, colorful environs across Africa, Asia, and the islands of the Indian Ocean and South Pacific. Great, they said, except a Tarzan movie is already in development. Nobody wanted another jungle movie. I was advised to abandon the project altogether as not worth my time. But I was young and overconfident, despite no real experience, so I agreed to work with the producers anyway. That's when the miracle every young writer hopes for happened. We pitched the idea to one of Hollywood's major studios, and I sold it in the room. Really, it was that easy. I'm suddenly a professional screenwriter. I called my parents, who thought I was wasting my time in Hollywood. They were divorced at this point, but I insisted they get on a conference call together because they needed to hear this together. Only later I realized they probably thought I was calling to give them some sort of terrible news, like I had knocked someone up or I had terminal cancer. Instead, I told them I'd sold my first script. They cried, I cried. I called my best friend next, who told me he was so relieved because he thought he was going to have to stage an intervention to stop me from throwing away more of my life chasing these ridiculous Hollywood dreams. The deal closed at the Writers Guild of America minimum for a feature, which at the time was roughly 90,000 US dollars. I always feel it's important to make clear to people how much of earnings like this writers get to keep. In my case, I had agents who took 10%, I had managers who took 10%, I had lawyers who took 5%, and the WGA took another 1.5% for membership dues. This is all before taxes, which, because I lived in LA, included federal, state, and city taxes. By the time it was done, I got to keep a little more than half of that. But hey, who cares, right? I was now a professional screenwriter and I paid off all of my credit card debt and some 20% of my school loans. I mean, I was otherwise completely fucking broke. But hey, small potatoes in the big scheme of things. At this point, I had to reckon with a new problem. Two of my reps had advised me not to pursue the project that I had just sold in the room. You almost never sell projects in the room. But this is how undeniable the idea was in that period action-adventure zeitgeist. Ocean's 11 meets Pirates of the Caribbean in the world of Arabian Nights was just a great, great idea. I wish I had 100 more like it. Hell, today, I'd take 3 more like it. I talked over the situation with every professional writer I knew, as well as my other team of reps, trying to find peace with what felt like god-awful advice I'd been given. But it just proved impossible. I knew no matter what else happened in the future, I would never trust their advice again. I would always second-guess them. There was only one thing to do. So I called them up, my voice shaking. I am not a confrontational person. I'm not good at shit like this. But I called them up, and I slowly got out that while I thanked them for their 8 months of collaboration, we needed to part ways. In other words, I fired them. Which is how we come to the lesson of the screenwriting tale. In an industry where nobody knows anything, but everybody insists they know everything, all you have are your creative instincts. That's literally what you're banking on in Hollywood, that your instincts are strong enough for others to hurl money at you to live your dream. This doesn't mean you'll always be right. Many of us are not. Many of us are also not meant to make it in this business despite our dreams. But the only way you will succeed in the long run, as far as I'm concerned, is to self-nurture your own voice and narrative instincts. Nobody knows what kind of a writer you want to be better than you. It's not always easy to find reps who get you, care about what you want to do, but it's much worse to be stuck with reps who constantly tell you the writer you want to be is the wrong kind of writer. By the way, I went on to pitch 2 other projects these reps told me were not great ideas, and I sold both of them, one of them also in the room. In the end, trusting my gut, my own creative instincts, was the absolutely right call. I'll wrap this story up with a little postscript of sorts. I made one of my most enduring friendships in Hollywood because of Thieves of Baghdad. Mark Guggenheim, the creator of Arrow and Legends of Tomorrow, was hired to rewrite my script. He took me out to dinner to talk about the project, Barbecue in the Valley, I still remember it, and became one of my most consistent voices of wisdom in the business, always there when I needed it, which means something truly great came of the project, other than launching my career and income. Because Thieves of Baghdad never got made, as you may have guessed. This is another lesson Thieves of Baghdad taught me. Most of the real long-term gains in this business are human ones. Never forget that the people you meet will be around a lot longer than the cash you make. Okay, that's it for this episode of 5 a.m. Story Talk. Thanks for listening. If you took anything from this episode, please consider sharing it somewhere on the internet. Maybe leave a star rating, and as I said at the start, if you have any questions about anything I've discussed here, jump into the comments and ask them. I will do my best to answer them for you. Next week, I'll be joined by screenwriter, author, and co host of the wildly popular podcast Script Notes, none other than John August. We'll be talking his life, craft, the enduring legacy of his film Big Fish, problematic artists, whether Hollywood still has the power to unite us, and so much more. I hope to see you there.